All right, welcome back to the Daily Facts. I want to go over the Jeffrey Epstein indictment because I think it's important. It's historical, right? We know he's deceased, but I think it's still important. So let's get into it. Jeffrey Epstein, he was born January 20th, 1953. We know he's deceased. He was born in Brooklyn, New York. His former position, Jeffrey Epstein, um, the Six Foundation. So we know he had a foundation. I believe he was a hedge fund manager, so on and so forth. This is how he supposedly got his millions and billions. As far as his family, he has one brother. Education wise, he went to Cooper Union and New York University. He did not receive degrees. And currently, his home, well, he died August 10th of 2019. He was 66 years old at the time, and his cause of death was suicide. So, before we get into the indictment, which I'm going to read through because, again, I think it's important, I want to go over some video clips so that we just remember Jeffrey Epstein, what he did. And it will also include Ghislaine Maxwell, because, as you well know, they were partners. In all of what is going on, and Ghislaine Maxwell will be going to court. I think it's July of 2021. She will be stand trial. So let's get into these clips. And then when we get back, we're going to get right into the indictment.
Accused sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Officials say the disgraced financier died by suicide, taking his own life while awaiting trial in a New York City jail cell. His body in that van you see there seen heading for the medical examiner's office. It is a stunning turn of events for a man who lived a life of exceptional wealth with extremely powerful people in his orbit. He faced close to half a century in prison if convicted. The Attorney General saying he's appalled at the development. Investigations now by the FBI and other agencies underway. Tonight, the FBI investigating a colossal error: how Jeffrey Epstein was apparently able to kill himself. ABC News first to report the high-profile accused sex trafficker's death by hanging inside of his cell. Staff at the Metropolitan Correction Center discovering him at 6:39 this morning. They say they tried to revive him. Paramedics later rushing him to the hospital where he was pronounced dead.
There were so many people that were looking forward to seeing him put behind bars for the rest of his life.
Several dozen women have accused Epstein of sexual misconduct when they were underage. Jennifer Arau says she was only 15 years old when Epstein raped her. The mega millionaire, 66 years old, was indicted for sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy. A judge denying him bail, citing what the FBI found inside of his home. A raid turning up a fake passport, plus hundreds, if not thousands of photos of nude women, some appearing to be minors.
Tonight, authorities tell ABC News that while disgraced millionaire Jeffrey Epstein is dead, the investigation is not. More accusers have come forward since his arrest. His apparent suicide less than 24 hours after 2,000 pages of new documents were made public for the first time, with accusations leveled against prominent people. A 2015 defamation suit brought by Virginia Roberts Giuffre was unsealed. The suit against Ghislaine Maxwell, a longtime Epstein associate and British socialite. In deposition testimony, Giuffre says that Maxwell recruited her to be a teenage sex slave to Epstein, adding she was later directed by Maxwell and Epstein to have sex with many, quote, powerful men and other world leaders. Some of those named: British royalty Prince Andrew, former governor and UN ambassador Bill Richardson, and the former influential senator from Maine, George Mitchell. All three men have strongly denied the allegations. Richardson and Mitchell say the claims are false and they never met Ms. Giuffre.
Stephanie, prosecutors have made it clear they are looking into potential accomplices to his crimes.
That's exactly right, Tom. Part of the investigation will be to see if anyone connected to Epstein and his alleged crimes should be charged. Many of his accusers have said there were a number of people recruiting on his behalf. And then there are those federal investigations into his apparent suicide and whether there was any wrongdoing at this correctional facility.
Okay, so we just watched a few clips of Jeffrey Epstein just to provide context, and we know that he is deceased, and the clips talk about the fact that this is an ongoing case, and we know that Ghislaine Maxwell will be going to court in, I believe, July of 2021. So I think this is an ongoing thing. No, he's not going to be tried because he's again deceased. But the clips at the last clip talked about potential other procurers for Jeffrey Epstein, in addition to Ghislaine Maxwell, who is innocent until proven guilty. But let's go ahead and jump right into the indictment. Okay, so it's United States District Court, Southern District of New York. So they are the ones that are bringing this about. United States of America versus Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant. So count one, sex trafficking conspiracy. All right, the grand jury charges, and this is the overview. As set forth herein, over the course of many years, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, sexually exploited and abused dozens of minor girls at his homes in Manhattan, New York, and Palm Beach, Florida, among other locations. In particular, from at least in or about 2002 up to and including at least in or about 2005, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, enticed and recruited and caused to be enticed and recruited minor girls to visit his mansion in Manhattan, New York, the New York residence, and his estate in Palm Beach, Florida, the Palm Beach residence, to engage in sex acts with him, after which he would give the victims hundreds of dollars in cash. Moreover, and in order to maintain and increase his supply of victims, Epstein also paid certain of his victims to recruit additional girls to be similarly abused by Epstein. In this way, Epstein created a vast network of underage victims for him to sexually exploit in locations including New York and Palm Beach. All right, so he had different places that he was exploiting these young girls. The victims described herein were as young as 14 years old at the time they were abused by Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, and were, for various reasons, often particularly vulnerable to exploitation. Epstein intentionally sought out minors and knew that many of his victims were, in fact, under the age of 18, including because, in some instances, minor victims expressly told him their age. In creating and maintaining this network of minor victims in multiple states to sexually abuse and exploit Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant worked and conspired with others, including employees and associates who facilitated his conduct by, among other things, contacting victims and scheduling their sexual encounters with Epstein at New York residence and at the Palm Beach residence. That's a disgrace. Now, the last clip we heard that this is an ongoing investigation. There were potentially other people that were procuring, so we could see other people pop up and indict it, right? Because he didn't do this alone, or just with himself and Ghislaine Maxwell. It's not possible. And too many people had to be aware. Factual background. During all time periods charged in this indictment, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, was a financier with multiple residents in the continental United States, including the New York residence and the Palm Beach residence. Beginning in at least 2002, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, enticed and recruited and caused to be enticed and recruited dozens of minor girls to engage in sex acts with him, after which Epstein paid the victims hundreds of dollars in cash at the New York residence and the Palm Beach residence. In both New York and Florida, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, perpetrated this abuse in similar ways. Victims were initially recruited to provide massages to Epstein, which would be performed nude or partially nude, would become increasingly sexual in nature, and would typically include one or more sex acts. Epstein paid his victims hundreds of dollars in cash for each encounter. Moreover, Epstein actively encouraged certain of his victims to recruit additional girls to be similarly sexually abused. Epstein incentivized his victims to become recruiters by paying these victim recruiters hundreds of dollars for each girl they brought to Epstein. In so doing, Epstein maintained a steady supply of new victims to exploit. So evidently he had an insatiable appetite for this. and he was paying these young girls, and they didn't know any better. I would venture to guess that they came from poor families. I don't know that for a fact, but they were just easily manipulated. Maybe they had, family issues. I don't know, but it is certainly not their fault, in my humble opinion. The New York residents, at all times relevant to this indictment, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, possessed and controlled a multi story private residence on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, New York, i.e., the New York residence, between at least in or about 2002 and in or about 2005. Epstein abused numerous minor victims at the New York residence by causing these victims to be recruited to engage in paid sex acts with him. When a victim arrived at the New York residence, she typically would be escorted to a room with a massage table where she would perform a massage on Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant. The victims, who were as young as 14 years of age, were told by Epstein or other individuals to partially or fully undress before beginning the massage. During the encounter, Epstein would escalate the nature and scope of physical contact with his victim to include, among other things, sex acts such as groping and direct and indirect contact with the victim's genitals. Epstein typically would also masturbate during these sexualized encounters, ask victims to touch him while he masturbated, and touch victims' genitals with his hands or with sex toys. In connection with each sexual encounter, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, or one of his employees or associates paid the victim in cash. Victims typically were paid hundreds of dollars in cash for each encounter. Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, knew that many of his New York victims were underage, including because certain victims told him their age. Further, once these minor victims were recruited, many were abused by Epstein on multiple subsequent occasions at the New York residence. Epstein sometimes personally contacted victims to schedule appointments at the New York residence. In other instances, Epstein directed employees and associates, including a New York based Employee 1, to communicate with victims via phone to arrange for these victims to return to New York residence for additional sexual encounters with Epstein. Additionally, and to further facilitate his ability to abuse minor girls in New York, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, asked and enticed certain of his victims to recruit additional girls to perform massages and similarly engage in sex acts with Epstein. When a victim would recruit another girl for Epstein, he paid both the victim recruiter and the new victim hundreds of dollars in cash. Through these victim recruiters, Epstein gained access to and was able to abuse dozens of additional minor girls. Again, it's the same story over and over again. He was paying them hundreds of dollars, and that was incentive for them to recruit. And again, they're young; they don't know any better. They just see money, and maybe they needed money for whatever reason. They enjoy the money. They don't have money, whatever the case may be. They were getting money, and they were helping to recruit. In particular, certain recruiters brought dozens of additional minor girls to the New York residence to give massages to and engage in sex acts with Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant. Epstein encouraged victims to recruit additional girls by offering to pay these victim recruiters for every additional girl they brought to Epstein. When a victim recruiter accompanied a new minor victim to the New York residence, both the victim recruiter and the new minor victim were paid hundreds of dollars by Epstein for each encounter. And I would assume the word gets around, right? It's astonishing that there weren't any adults that stepped in. In addition, certain victim recruiters routinely scheduled these encounters through Employee 1, who sometimes asked the recruiters to bring a specific minor girl for Epstein. Okay, so he was picking specific girls now. The Palm Beach residence. In addition to recruiting and abusing minor girls in New York, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, created a similar network of minor girls to victimize in Palm Beach, Florida, where Epstein owned, possessed, and controlled another large residence, i.e., the Palm Beach residence. Epstein frequently traveled from New York to Palm Beach by private jet, before which an employee or associate would ensure that minor victims were available for encounters upon his arrival in Florida. At the Palm Beach residence, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, engaged in a similar course of abuse conduct. When a victim initially arrived at the Palm Beach residence, she would be escorted to a room, sometimes by an employee of Epstein's, including, at times, two assistants, employee 2 and employee 3, who, as described herein, were also responsible for scheduling sexual encounters with minor victims. Once inside, the victim would provide a nude or semi-nude massage for Epstein, who would himself typically be nude. During these encounters, Epstein would escalate the nature and scope of the physical encounter to include sex acts such as groping and direct and indirect contact with the victim's genitals. Epstein would also typically masturbate during these encounters, ask victims to touch him while he masturbated, and touch victims' genitals with his hands or with sex toys. In connection with each sexual encounter, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, or one of his employees or associates paid the victim in cash. Victims typically were paid hundreds of dollars for each encounter. Again, it's repeating over and over. Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, knew that certain of his victims were underage, including because certain victims told him their age, and that's repeating itself as well. In addition, as with New York-based victims, many Florida victims were recruited or abused by Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, on multiple additional occasions. Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, who during the relevant time period was frequently in New York, would arrange for employee 2 or other employees to contact victims by phone in advance of Epstein's travel to Florida to ensure appointments were scheduled for when he arrived. In particular, in certain instances, employee 2 placed phone calls to minor victims in Florida to schedule encounters at the Palm Beach residence. At the time of certain of those phone calls, Epstein and employee 2 were in New York. Additionally, certain of the individuals victimized at the Palm Beach residence were contacted by phone by employee 3 to schedule these encounters. Moreover, as in New York, to ensure a steady stream of minor victims, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, asked and enticed certain victims in Florida to recruit other girls to engage in sex acts. Epstein paid hundreds of dollars to victim recruiters for each additional girl they brought to the Palm Beach residence. Okay, moving on to statutory allegations. From at least in or about 2002 up to and including in or about 2005 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, and others, known and unknown, willfully and knowingly did combine, conspire, confederate, and agree together and with each other to commit an offense against the United States, to wit, sex trafficking of minors in violation of Title 18 United States Code Section 1591A and B. It was a part and object of the conspiracy that Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, and others, known and unknown, would and did in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce, recruit, entice, harbor, transport, provide, and obtain by any means a person, and to benefit financially and by receiving anything of value from participation in a venture which has engaged in any such act, knowing that the person had not attained the age of 18 years and would be caused to engage in a commercial sex act in violation of Title 18 United States Code Sections 1591A and B. 2. Overt acts. In furtherance of the conspiracy and to effect the illegal object thereof, the following overt acts, among others, were committed in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere. In or about 2004, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, enticed and recruited multiple minor victims, including minor victims identified herein as minor victim 1, minor victim 2, and minor victim 3, to engage in sex acts with Epstein at his residences in Manhattan, New York, and Palm Beach, Florida, after which he provided them with hundreds of dollars in cash for each encounter. In or about 2002, minor victim one was recruited to engage in sex acts with Epstein and was repeatedly sexually abused by Epstein at the New York residence over a period of years and was paid hundreds of dollars for each encounter. That's just unbelievable that this was going on for years and there were no adults that came forth. Maybe there were and nobody listened. I don't know, but it's just boggles the mind. Epstein also encouraged and enticed minor victim one to recruit other victims to engage in paid sex acts, which she did. Epstein asked minor victim one how old she was, and minor victim one answered truthfully. Just imagine how these young girls are feeling in their adulthood. They probably feel so much guilt. Well, I helped do this. But you were a minor, you didn't understand. You were young. Your mind and your understanding of things is not there yet. In or about 2004, Employee One, located in the Southern District of New York and on behalf of Epstein, placed a telephone call to minor victim one in order to schedule an appointment for minor victim one to engage in paid sex acts with Epstein. In or about 2004, minor victim two was recruited to engage in sex acts with Epstein and was repeatedly sexually abused by Epstein at the Palm Beach residence over a period of years and was paid hundreds of dollars after each encounter. Epstein also encouraged and enticed minor victim two to recruit other girls to engage in paid sex acts, which she did. In or about 2005, Employee 2, located in the Southern District of New York and on behalf of Epstein, placed a telephone call to minor victim 2 in order to schedule an appointment for minor victim 2 to engage in paid sex acts with Epstein. In or about 2005, minor victim 3 was recruited to engage in sex acts with Epstein and was repeatedly sexually abused by Epstein at the Palm Beach residence over a period of years and was paid hundreds of dollars for each encounter. Epstein also encouraged and enticed minor victim 3 to recruit other girls to engage in paid sex acts, which she did. Epstein asked minor victim 3 how old she was, and minor victim 3 answered truthfully. So it's a pattern of asking and telling and him having an understanding as an adult man, right? I mean, he's an intelligent person. Clearly, he has businesses and he's a millionaire, billionaire. In or about 2005, Employee 2, located in the Southern District of New York and on behalf of Epstein, placed a telephone call to minor victim 3 in Florida in order to schedule an appointment for minor victim 3 to engage in paid sex acts with Epstein. In or about 2004, Employee 3 placed a telephone call to minor victim 3 in order to schedule an appointment for minor victim 3 to engage in paid sex acts with Epstein. I mean, it's unbelievable. All of this back and forth and making phone calls and setting this up. There's just so many people involved in this, and yet we only have two people that are being charged. It doesn't make sense to me. Is there something I'm missing here? Title 18, United States Code, Section 371, Count 2, sex trafficking. The grand jury further charges the allegations contained in paragraphs 1 through 19 and 22 of this indictment are repeated and re-alleged as if fully set forth within. From at least in or about 2002 up and including in or about 2005 in the Southern District of New York, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, willfully and knowingly in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce, did recruit, entice, harbor, transport, provide, and obtain by any means a person knowing that the person had not attained the age of 18 years and would be caused to engage in a commercial sex act, and did aid and abet the same. To wit, Epstein recruited, enticed, harbored, transported, provided, and obtained numerous individuals who were less than 18 years old, including but not limited to minor victim 1, as described above, and who were then caused to engage in at least one commercial act in Manhattan, New York. Title 18, United States Code, Sections 1591A, B, 2, and 2. Forfeiture allegations. As a result of committing the offense alleged in count 2 of this indictment, Jeffrey Epstein, the defendant, shall forfeit to the United States pursuant to Title 18 United States Code Section 1594C1 any property, real and personal, that was used or intended to be used to commit or to facilitate the commission of the offense alleged in count 2, and any property, real or personal, constituting or derived from any proceeds obtained directly or indirectly as a result of the offense alleged in count 2, or any property traceable to such property and the following specific property: the lot or parcel of land together with its buildings, appurtenances, improvements, fixtures, attachments, and easements located at 9 East 71st Street, New York, New York, with block number 1386 and lot number 10, owned by Maple Inc. Substitute asset provision. If any of the above described forfeitable property as a result of any act or omission of the defendant, A, cannot be located upon the exercise of due diligence, B, has been transferred or sold to or deposited with a third person, C, has been placed beyond the jurisdiction of the court, D, has been substantially diminished in value, or E, has been commingled with other property which cannot be subdivided without difficulty. It is the intent of the United States, pursuant to 21 U.S.C. 853P and 28 U.S.C. 2461C, to seek forfeiture of any other property of the defendant up to the value of the above forfeitable property. Title 18 United States Code Section 1594, Title 21 United States Code Section 853P, and Title 28 United States Code Section 2461. Okay. And that is the end of the United States of America versus Jeffrey Epstein indictment. And I want to go to an executive order, I believe, that President Trump drew up regarding this type of activity, sex trafficking, so on and so forth. Let's take a look at that before we end here. I think it's important and it relates to this. Okay, let's take a look at this executive order. It was issued on December 21st, 2017. Executive order blocking the property of persons involved in serious human rights abuse or corruption. I, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America, find that the prevalence and severity of human rights abuse and corruption that have their source in a whole or in substantial part outside the United States, such as those committed or directed by persons listed in the annex to this order, have reached such scope and gravity that they threaten the stability of international political and economic systems. Human rights abuses and corruption undermine the values that form an essential foundation of stable, secure, and functioning societies, have devastating impacts on individuals, weaken democratic institutions, degrade the rule of law, perpetuate violent conflicts, facilitate the activities of dangerous persons, and undermine economic markets. The United States seeks to impose tangible and significant consequences on those who commit serious human rights abuses or engage in corruption, as well as to protect the financial system of the United States from abuse by these persons. I therefore determine that serious human rights abuses and corruptions around the world constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States, and I hereby declare a national emergency to deal with that threat. So I hereby determine and order all property and interests in property that are in the United States that hereafter come within the United States, or that are hereafter come within the possession or control of any United States person, of the following persons are blocked and may not be transferred, paid, exported, withdrawn, or otherwise dealt in. The persons listed in the annex, so on and so forth. So I think that's very, very important to what we're discussing here. Okay, so we have an executive order from President Trump, executive order on combating human trafficking and online child exploitation in the United States. This was issued on January 31st, 2020. All right. By the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, including the Trafficking Victims Protection Act 22, it is hereby ordered as follows. Human trafficking is a form of modern slavery. Throughout the United States and around the world, human trafficking tears apart communities, fuels criminal activity, and threatens the national security of the United States. It is estimated that millions of individuals are trafficked around the world each year. And that's true. So President Trump is saying no more of this. And I think this is important as it relates to the Jeffrey Epstein case as well. All right. I felt it's important to point out those executive orders. And yeah, it relates to this sex trafficking conspiracy that Jeffrey Epstein was caught up in, along with many, many, many other adult people. They're just as involved, and they should, in my humble opinion, be indicted as well. This is ongoing, and we're going to hear more coming out of this. Yes, the Jeffrey Epstein case. There's more to come, and it's not just Ghislaine Maxwell. So if you've enjoyed, please do like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment below, and we'll be back again soon. Thanks for stopping by. Bye.